everyone. This is Ellen Chu, and I want to welcome you to Season 2 of the What Drives You podcast. Season 2 will be a combination of solo episodes and interviews where we'll continue exploring the concept of the family car together. My guests this season have fascinating stories that I think you'll not only find interesting, but that you'll be able to relate to. And of course, the goal of all of these conversations is that we'll learn to understand ourselves better and to have more compassion for ourselves. So, as we get this road trip into Season 2 started, I have a funny confession to make regarding this particular episode. You're going to notice some random background noises throughout this recording, some thumping and creaking. And do you know what those noises are? It's the sound of my microphone falling over and me awkwardly holding it up as I'm talking. So, I hope you can laugh with me about that, and I promise my audio will be improving in future episodes. But I wanted to share that little tidbit with you for a couple of reasons. First, I want you to know that it's scary, very scary, and uncomfortable and messy for all of us as we learn new things. I'm in a whole new season of learning how to publish and market a book and how to record podcasts. And let me tell you, it's uncomfortable and a totally imperfect process. I wanted to share that in case you're thinking of doing something new so that maybe you can take the pressure off of yourself to get it perfect right off the bat. If I can record a podcast on GarageBand with my microphone falling over, then you can do your thing too. And second, I want you to know that we're in a real car here. Whether you're a guest on the podcast or a listener, I want us to be able to have real conversations here, to be imperfect and authentic together. So there you go. There's a little peek behind the curtain of my very imperfect podcasting learning curve. Okay, so lastly, you may have noticed that our What Drives You podcast took a break for a bit, a pit stop, to use our car metaphor. Well, I've been busy writing and publishing my new book by the same name. It's called What Drives You: How Our Family Dynamics Shape the People We Become. And it's now available on Amazon or through your favorite bookstore. I have to tell you that the response has been so incredibly awesome and positive. I'm so happy to hear from those of you who have read it that the book is helping you to better understand yourselves and the members of your family, and ultimately to have more compassion for yourself and each other and for the world, because the world needs more compassion now. And that leads me to what I wanted to share with you today. So let's jump on in. My podcast today is going to be about what the world needs now. We are living in a very, very difficult time. There is so much tension in the world outside of us, and the tension has been there now for a long time in terms of months and years. I like to think of it as a lack of safety. It's like at times in our life, we can kind of go to bed at night and get up in the morning and be pretty sure that we kind of have a sense of what's going on. Of course, we can't control everything, and there are always things that become difficult or that are problems or tragedies, but we pretty much have a handle on how to control our lives, even including all of that stuff. But now we have had a lack of safety for so long, and we really aren't sure when we get up in the mornings now how to keep ourselves safe physically, safe emotionally, safe psychologically. It's a really hard world to live in. We have been living with such divisiveness in our society that many of us don't feel safe in terms of that. We might not feel safe with people that we used to feel safe with, that we know now feel differently than we do about our own health and safety, about COVID, about how to keep ourselves safe from COVID, about how much attention to pay to it, about how we live our lives as fully as we can within it. People are finding tremendous differences now between themselves and people that they used to be close to, rather, if it be friends or family. And that creates a sense of unsafety. I've worked with families now that have had a very hard time when they all get together, even for holidays and things that they were always used to getting together for, because people have differing opinions and they may argue ideologically about things, but ultimately that really all brings us back to a place of not feeling emotionally safe. We leave those situations feeling agitated and with angst, and it creates a level of emotion that we just didn't have before. We used to be able to count on many, many things in our lives that would help us feel okay and kind of bring us back to the moment and distract us from the normal, natural difficulties of life. But now many of those have been taken away from us, and we are finding it very difficult. Many of us believe that there is what I call outrageousness. I'd like to explain that term and explain why I use that term. The term means that there is a lot of stuff that would not seem to us to be within our own range of normal or everyday. And I call those things outrageous because I think to our bodies, things feel outrageous. They feel so far from the norm. They feel so different than anything has ever felt to us before. I know in my lifetime, and I'm not young, I've never, ever experienced anything like this before. I refer to it as the disruption of shared values. I can't remember a time in our history when we were confronted with a crisis like COVID and we didn't just all bond together and decide what we needed to do to overcome it. I've never lived through a time with a danger that we have decided that there are several opposing ways to deal with the danger. And wherever you stand, and I believe it's a continuum, not necessarily a black or white thing, but wherever you stand on that, it doesn't matter. It's just that we no longer participate in things as a team. And as humans, we seek to be part of teams. And so many of you may have a new team now and excluded others who may have been on your team before from your team because you do have different values about how to live at this time. My point about it is that it makes our bodies not be able to settle. We don't feel safe. There's no clear-cut way anymore to feel safe. We all are managing a tremendous lack of control in keeping ourselves safe, in helping our family members to stay safe. It makes life feel very hard. And my word for that, and it's a big word, but I use it, is dangerous. So I'd like to describe a little bit about what I mean by dangerous. When we grow up in our cars, we start in our cars from actually before we're born. And we make sense of the world through our very young, immature, developing ability to think. We think about things even before we have the words for them, long before. If you have been with a baby lately, you'll watch a baby get distressed, be upset. And that's because the baby's brain is working and telling them something distressing. I'm hungry, I'm uncomfortable, I'm lonely. So our bodies from the very, very beginnings begin to incorporate these experiences. And our bodies seek to create a sense called safety. And safety means I am okay right now. And in this world that we live in, many people are really, really having a hard time feeling like I'm okay right now. And so day after day after day mounts where our bodies do not settle, they do not feel safe, and life can feel dangerous. Again, I know that's a big word, but if we understand that somebody is feeling unsafe, it might explain why they are acting the way they act. So what this ongoing unsafe feeling is high emotion. Often it is unconscious to us, even though some of us may be aware of it in our bodies. I would question you, are any of you suffering with something going on physically with your body now that you weren't 2 years ago? And I would wonder, sometimes our high emotion turns into physical symptoms. But this high emotion or high levels of, I like to call it angst. Angst is sort of a worry about what might be, what might happen, what could happen. And angst can also be a rumination about the past, what did happen, and worry about that. And we are living with this high level of angst now. Again, for many of us, it isn't conscious. Some clients who I speak to, I say something about this angst and they say, oh yes, boy, I feel it. I just am not as calm as I used to be. I'm more depressed. I'm more anxious. I'm scared. I'm irritable. I find myself being intolerant or impatient with others. I may be quick to anger. I may be quick to withdraw. In my car, I grew up learning that when I had angst, that I would withdraw. So when I feel afraid, when I feel angsty, when I feel nervous, I withdraw. That's what I was trained to do in my car. I've learned as I've grown older that in some circumstances, when I feel like someone else has made me angsty, I may withdraw and then pout. But anyway, I withdraw. Some of us withdraw. Some of us feel depressed. Some of us feel overwhelmed. So we can't seem to get started in things. We can't tackle the things we used to tackle. I can't tell you how many people I talk to now that tell me that they just have loads and loads of laundry that aren't complete. They're either not started, or they're partway done, or they're all washed and dried, but they're in baskets, they're not folded, or they're not put away. I didn't hear so much about that before, but that is about feeling overwhelmed, feeling not present or not focused, or not able to see things through, to have the concentration, the attention to see things through. And I know that this heightened level of angst that we feel now is at the heart of much of that. And again, for many of us, we don't realize that we feel all that angst, but our bodies know it. And it seems like our bodies aren't cooperating with what it is that we'd like to do or get done. I find that for me, the angst evidences a lot in making mistakes. And in my car growing up, I needed to be the perfect little girl. And so for me, making mistakes are not easy. I have tried to work really hard to know that I'm allowed to make a mistake, because I am human and humans do that. But I am very hard on myself in that way. And I find myself making many more mistakes now than I did a few years ago. Now, I am a few years older, but even so, I believe that what's going on for me is really about this high level of angst. I used to say that we would wake up in the mornings at maybe 10% angst. This is before COVID, before the current very divisive climate. And then we would go up from there as events and people, passed through our day. But now I feel like we're waking up at 40%, and we're doing that every day and then going up from there. So the reason why this is so important to understand is because when we have angst like this, humans always have angst. It isn't like it goes away, but we learn how to deal with our angst in our cars growing up. We learn it by how people treat each other in our cars. And we also learn it by how we get treated in our cars. So I'm going to talk about things that happen in the car, both overt and covert things. And if you read my book, a lot of this is sort of covered in the chapter that talks about types of cars, various ways of how cars work, how cars communicate, how cars get their point across, how cars treat each other. And I list 4 different ways in my book. And many cars use a combination of those 4 ways. But ultimately, we learn how to tolerate this stress that we're under by how stress gets tolerated in our cars. Sometimes it's overt, meaning that if anyone were to look into a car, you would see how stress gets tolerated. People may be yelling at each other, "Quit doing that. What's wrong with you? Sit down." People might be totally shut down or quiet or sort of look like mannequins in the car. Both of those are overt ways of managing stress, so that people in the car know that when we're stressed, we can sort of scream and yell at each other. Or they also know, like I knew in my car, that when we're stressed, we just clam up and sit there and tolerate it and try to. Some cars, you have to have a smile on your face. Some cars, you actually have to say good things, because that's what the car demands, and people learn that in there. But more often than the overt expression are the covert expressions of how to manage the stress. So you might look at a car and it might look like people are actually talking and communicating and saying things that have value. But if you were really to know and understand what was going on with each person in the car, that may be a cover-up. that may absolutely be a cover-up. So in my car, I learned that little girls are to be seen and not heard. And so my job in the car was to not have needs and not ask for anything. But I also knew that I needed to look pretty and I needed to be somewhat talkative, because if it was just quiet in our car, that would have raised the angst. Some of you might have grown up in a car where it did need to be quiet. I've talked to other people who say, oh yeah, I heard that little girls are to be seen and not heard. But in my car, that meant really not being heard in their cars. In my car, it meant being heard, but only in the ways that were pleasing. So, and if you would meet me now, you would see that about me, that my first natural default mode is to try to be pleasing. And you know what? It's worked really well for me in my life. I have had to learn to get past that and get real and have a voice sometimes. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I can't, even though I wish I did. But in any event, we learn how to manage the current stress in our cars. So there's two basic ways that cars manage the stress. And those ways are either cars that are tolerant of emotion or cars that are intolerant of emotion. Cars that are tolerant of emotion allow for people to be upset, to be sad, to have difficulty. They don't necessarily allow for people to take those feelings out on others, to act out those feelings, but they do tolerate the feelings if people want to talk about them. Like, I had a really bad day. If you live with someone now, can you walk in and say, I had a really bad day? Now, some people's response to that is tolerant of that. They may say something like, oh, I'm so sorry. What happened? Tell me about it. And they may say something like, that must have been really hard for you, or seems like you need a hug. Those things are what I call tolerant of emotion. Okay. Other cars are intolerant of emotion. And how they are intolerant of emotion may be in many different ways. They may ignore emotion. Somebody gets in a car and they seem upset. Nobody says anything to them. Somebody walks in the door and they seem upset. They may be punitive towards them. What's the matter with you? You want something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry about. In some cars, intolerance is created by denying emotion. Well, that shouldn't make you sad. What about those other poor people, or something like that? Denying that somebody feels how they feel. That's what your boss said to you? Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Basically, you're stupid for feeling like how you feel. Some cars criticize your emotion. Some cars blame your emotion. This is a common one. You're just too sensitive. Folks, I am here to tell you there is no such thing as too sensitive. If it hurts, it hurts. It might not hurt somebody else in your car, but if it hurts you, it hurts you. It's one of the cardinal rules of couples, is that we have to learn what hurts the other person and not judge it and not be mad at it. We could secretly wish that it didn't hurt the other person. That's easy to wish, but we have to acknowledge, for that person, it hurts. We have to acknowledge it. What I say all the time is, if you would have lived every step in someone's life with them, you would understand why that hurts now. But most of us haven't lived every step of someone's life with them. And so We don't understand or don't get or don't like that they happen to feel the way that they feel. For some cars, people get back at people's emotion. There's some kind of retribution because your emotion upsets them. So then they have to try to upset you back. All of that is learned in a car. All of our coping behaviors are learned in our cars. We incorporate these methods through osmosis, through watching, through paying attention, through getting hurt ourselves, but we learn how to do it. So if we grow up in a car where somebody says, tell me what happened today, and that must have been so hard for you, and I'm here with you, and I'm sad that it was so hard, and let me give you a hug, we come to understand that when we are hurting, people can help us to feel better. And in the world now, I think we have completely forgotten that on so many levels. We think in the world now that the way to feel better is to be meaner, to be angrier, to be fighting more. And that comes from being so divided. And unfortunately, meaner, angrier, fighting more only increases our angst, only keeps us tolerating this angst. And what we really, really need so much is to be soothed, is just to be soothed. I say in any family, in any situation where you are together with someone a lot of the time, other than when it would be inappropriate, it's fair to ask for a hug. No questions needed. I just need a hug right now. Because most of us get some soothing from just being hugged. So what we need right now is soothing. We need to know that we are okay at the moment. And what I say about okay at the moment, which is a mindfulness exercise, is people say to me, yeah, I tried it, it didn't work. And I'll say, did it work for the moment? Well, yeah, it worked for the moment, but then I needed to do it 5 minutes again. And I say, okay, do it 5 minutes again. It is a practice. It is a process. It is a journey. Self-soothing is a journey. I call it the journey of the 4 A's. So when we feel stirred up, or when we are angry or impatient or irritable or withdrawn or overwhelmed, the first A is aware. If we can just say a sentence of awareness to ourselves, and I'll tell you what my sentence is. Whoa, I am stirred up. And when I think that, I'm thinking down into my body. My stirred up in my body always happens in my gut. It has since I've been a little girl. And I can just sort of follow the stirred up with my thoughts right down my esophagus into my belly. And I think to myself, whoa, I am stirred up. I call this aware. The first step of making ourselves feel better is to be aware that we don't feel good right at this moment. That's the first step. If we don't feel aware of it, we can't fix it. The next step is to acknowledge what is going on. Now, this is what trips people up sometimes, and I want to explain what I mean by acknowledge. some people can imagine, close their eyes for a second, imagine inside their body and actually come up with an emotion. I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm in pain, I'm lonely, I'm missing somebody. Some people can do that. But I can tell you most of the time for myself, when I say, whoa, I am stirred up, and I try to go into my body, I really am not able to identify a specific stressor or trigger. I just am angsty, and it can make me jumpy, it can make me irritable, it can make me feel unsettled. And so acknowledging what's going on, it can just be, I'm hyped up right now. That's all. That's all it has to be. I have angst right now. I don't know exactly why. So we have aware, acknowledge. The third thing is to accept. What a lot of people do when they acknowledge that they're angsty is they say something to themselves like, well, that's stupid. There's nothing to be angsty about. And that usually happens because they grew up in a car where someone said that to them about their emotion enough of the time that they now incorporated that voice and they say it to themselves. The last thing I want you to do in this little exercise is to sound critical to yourself, because that is not going to help your angst. No angst goes away because we are mad at it. It never happens. The angst is a signal that we need to soothe it. So accept it. Wow, I'm angsty right now. No particular thing, but my body sure is agitated and I feel it. And I'm not able to sort of settle in and be relaxed. Aware, acknowledge, accept. And the fourth A is action. I have found that when I am in this state, I need to move my body. Now, moving my body can be something as unnoticeable and insignificant as uncrossing my legs and recrossing them the other way, changing my position in the seat that I'm sitting in. It can be taking a little bit of a harder blink and taking a breath and exhaling it. It can be getting up, walking around. It can be doing some kind of physical exercise. It can be moving from one room to another in the house. It can mean doing something with my hands. That could be something on the computer. It could be some kind of crafty thing. It could be anything that is going to cause my body to move at all and sort of distract me from the moment. So if you are involved with someone else, having a conversation, having an argument with them, if you do these 4 A's, and they can take literally all together 15 seconds, not even that much, 5 seconds, I would say. Ooh, I'm really stirred up right now. This person's making me really angry. I can't believe they said that to me. I'm feeling kind of hurt and mad. Oh boy, that really got to me. There's a lot in this, and actually I'm okay. And then my action in that place would be to say something or do something in that situation that I wouldn't have been able to access while I was in that high emotion. Like my husband and I have this rule where when we are in a heated conversation about something where we disagree, either one of us can say the word, I'm flooded, which means I'm flooded with emotion, and that signals a timeout. If I wouldn't say that, I would likely say something to him that A, wouldn't be helpful, that B, I might regret, that C, would likely push him away or push me away so I could get to that more comfortable place of withdrawal, which never helps. So the action may be having to do with someone else, or the action may be having to do with just calming yourself down. So what the world needs now is self-compassion and compassion for others. We aren't getting anywhere thinking that what we need is to be meaner, tougher, more divided, and filled with hatred. We aren't getting anywhere. And the place we have to start with this is in our cars. We have to. Teach the other people in your car the 4 A's: aware, acknowledge, accept, and act. And see if you can't raise the compassion level in your car. I bet you can, and I bet it'll make you feel better. So as always, thank you for listening. I would encourage you to please go to my website at ellenwyshoot.com to hear all of my podcasts. And if you enjoyed this podcast, I would love for you to give it a review on whatever platform you listen to it. That would be wonderful. I want to take a minute to, again, promote my book, What Drives You? It is easily available on Amazon or any of your favorite bookstores. I had a hard time promoting it before because I wasn't sure about it, but the response I have gotten has been so positive, and I thank you all so much for that. And so I'm telling you, buy it. It's a small book. It's an easy read, but it packs a powerful punch that I think will be helpful to you. Until next time, thanks so much. Bye-bye.